Welcome to the final lecture ever of America at 250. It's wonderful to be back in the room with all of you one last time. For this last lecture, you are going to hear from each of us in turn, but we're going to do something a little different from what we did over the course of the semester, which is we made our way from 1776 to the 21st century in one semester, and now we're going to move back in time and get ourselves back to the American Revolution today. So I start when you move backward in time, and I wanted to go back to a moment from a lecture a couple of weeks ago when I started to show a video of the Houston Congresswoman Barbara Jordan speaking in 1976 on the bicentennial at the Democratic National Convention. And as you might recall, that video got, turn that better? Okay. As you might recall, that video got cut off for technical reasons, but I've been thinking about it as we've been finishing up the class here. At the time, I said, here we were in the 1970s, and her appearance at that convention really symbolized many of the changes that had been happening in the previous decade and a half. The entry of new people into American politics, the victories of the civil rights movement, the rise of the women's movement, the creation and resorting of new political coalitions, the changing nature of the American political parties. But she was also, in that moment, trying to name what was going on at the bicentennial in that year of 1976 and where it was that the United States stood in that moment. And she looked out across the country and she saw a troubled place. She said, I could list the problems which cause people to feel cynical, angry, and frustrated. This is in the moment of 1976. Problems which include lack of integrity in government, the feeling that the individual no longer counts, the reality of material and spiritual poverty, the feeling that the grand American experiment is failing or has failed. And she went on to say, we are a people in a quandary about the present. We are a people in search of our future. We are a people in search of a national community. And as she tried to think about that moment of the present, in that case, 1976, of the future, she also turned to the past. And since it was the bicentennial, she turned back to the Declaration of Independence to say, we are attempting to fulfill our national purpose to create and sustain a society in which all of us are equal. That was a reflection on her political moment and on that moment of commemoration and memory that was the bicentennial. And as we've said many times in this class, that's part of what centennials or semiquincentennials, as we're about to come to next year, are for. They're moments to reflect, to think about the connections between the present and the past, the present, and into the future. And of course, that is the reason that we all gathered here on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. As I have been talking with people about the 250th, about where we stand in American history, there are a lot of people who say, look, I don't want anything to do with whatever celebrations are coming next year. Right? This country is a mess. I don't want to celebrate it. And that's fair enough. There are plenty of problems out there. But I would point out that that was also the case, as Barbara Jordan said, in 1976, when the country was coming off Watergate and the conflicts of the 1960s and was in the midst of one of the great economic crises of the 20th century. It was true in 1926 at the sesquicentennial, which was a moment that the United States had just come out of World War I and out of a global flu pandemic, and was in the midst of ferocious fights about immigration and race and women's rights. And it was certainly true in 1876 on the national centennial, when the country was just a decade out from the Civil War, was engaged still in that moment in trying to sort out some of the most profound questions in the nation's history. In 1876, the country nonetheless managed to mark that moment in a pretty big way by hosting a major World's Fair, really the first World's Fair in the United States in Philadelphia. And about 10 million people showed up. It was just a giant city full of industrial displays and pavilions from around the world, and displays from most of the states of the United States, displaying what they thought mattered about their present, their past, and their future. So 10 million people in 1876 was about 20% of the American population, over a couple of months, all assembling in one place, the city of Philadelphia, to think about American history, its legacies, and where they fit into that story. So this was a big scale moment of contemplation, I think larger scale than anything we are going to see next year. It was also an attempt to have a little bit of fun in a dark and deep and divided moment. One of the things that you could do at the 1876 Philadelphia Expo was to mount the arm and up into the torch of the Statue of Liberty, which, as you can see, was not finished on time in 1876. And this was also an attempt to raise some money so that the Statue of Liberty could, in fact, be erected, which would happen the following decade. And I've always loved this image because I think it captures something about the work in progress that is American history, right? There's a little bit of hucksterism in there. There's some big ambition. There's some really good ideas. And then there's some imperfect execution. And so I hope that as we move into the 250th and you think about all of those things, that you might want to hold on to this image of an incomplete Statue of Liberty. I also hope that as you enter into this moment, that this class has been useful to you in helping you to both think big and then think about the long arc of history. One thing that we've seen over the course of the semester is how quickly things can change and how there are certain themes and ideas and touchstones that last through generation after generation. Problems that last over the generations, dilemmas that last over the generations, ideas that last over the generations. One of the things that we wanted to do in this class was try to bring some of those generations together as well in this one room. One of the things that has been really wonderful is to stand up here, and there's a little bit of self-segregation that happened in the way that you all seat. So, the younger people are mostly up the stairs, but nonetheless, it has been amazing to see you all here in this room together and to be part of this conversation as it develops. So I hope as this course finishes up, that this has been an opportunity to have some different conversations than you might otherwise have had about American history. I hope it has been an opportunity to be curious about each other and to be curious about the people of the past in new ways. I think it's often easy from our vantage point to sit in judgment on the past and to think we know better. And in a lot of cases, that might be true. In other cases, I think we still have a lot to learn from some of the figures that we've seen over the course of the semester. For me, the greatest pleasure of this class has been the opportunity to learn. So when you're a professor, you're often the one teaching, but the opportunities to learn are fewer. And so it was just such a thrill to be able to work with David and Joanne and to learn from them as well as from all of you. And I thought that I might just finish off also by noting that that is a project that has gone on for decades and centuries within this building and within the institution that brought us all together, which is Yale. The DeVane lectures are named after William DeVane, who was the dean of Yale College from the late 1930s through the early 1960s. So if you have learned anything in this class, that means from the in some ways, darkest parts, or at least the continuing parts of the Great Depression in the late 1930s, on into World War II and the birth of the military-industrial complex, through the Red Scare and the kinds of dilemmas that that posed for universities around questions of academic freedom, free speech, how to educate people for modern American society, and on into the dawn of the 1960s, when not only this institution, but the country at large went through such dramatic transformations. In fact, when he died, his memorial service was held here in 1965 in Battell Chapel. He presided over a very different university than the one we inhabit. I know that because in that university, I would not have been standing up here at the pulpit and at the front of the classroom. But he also really believed that what education was about, what a college education was about, was being able to step back from whatever your moment might be, to take advantage of what other people in the past have thought about, the conflicts, the mistakes, the high aspirations they might have had, and to actually learn a little bit from that. And I'll quote from William DeVane talking about that. "We have no time for the transient or the immediately applicable and quickly advantageous," he said, "of what the educational enterprise is about. We aim to give the student the solid and permanent studies of man's concerns, a long view of man's life, and a vision of the greatness to which he may aspire." I might choose a different word than man to express some of those sentiments. But in this class, I hope that we actually have given you a few things that are immediately applicable and quickly advantageous. I'm not opposed to that, particularly as we head into 2026. But I also hope that you are coming away with the long view, with a deeper understanding of where this country has been, where we are right now, and where we might be going. But first, we're going to move back into the past, and I'm going to hand things off to David Blight. Thank you.
You're down, comrade. Thank you, Bev. Oh, we don't use this mic, right? Okay. We are going to miss you. Why do you do history? What's the point? Probably, I mean, there are many reasons, but probably there's something in the present that bugs you. Really bugs you. Or terrifies you. But where else are you going to go? Your therapist. Your pastor, your minister, your rabbi. Your rabbi or your pastor might say, well, you need to read more history, but everywhere you look now, Americans are talking about free speech. So I'm going to take my 10 minutes and talk about free speech. Where's the remote? Bev, do you still have it? Oh, there it is, there it is. We have a new remote, it's very small. There we are. The First Amendment reads, this is our text today, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. You've all heard that. You've read it on a restaurant placemat. You have it in your pocket constitution, as I do. A relatively little known but extremely important part of Abraham Lincoln's presidency was his struggle with free speech. Civil wars are often not a good time for problems of dissent. First Amendment was brutally tested during the Civil War. Go with me to 1863, actually 63. The war had reached a ghastly, horrible scale of killing and death and suffering, casualties, moral crisis. Civilians had caused all kinds of complex problems with loyalty and dissent. Loyalty is one thing in peacetime, loyalty is another thing in wartime. There was the border state problem. 4 of those slave states were still in the Union. There's a terrible tension between the need to have a government constrained by law, that's what our Constitution does, but also some discretionary power to respond to terrible crises. You can't just look that one up in the Constitution. Well, you can, but Lincoln will suspend the writ of habeas corpus 8 times during the Civil War. 8 times. That's your right to be charged and arraigned in court before you can ever be detained. Otherwise, people are at the mercy of the executive power. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution reads, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. That person who might suspend the writ is going to have to read that in a certain way. The first was in Maryland. You may know this story. U.S. troops were trying to get through Maryland, particularly through Baltimore, to get to Washington as early as April 1861. They couldn't get through Baltimore. Secessionists in Baltimore blockaded the city, burned a bridge, and some people were killed in a riot. There sat Lincoln in Washington, D.C. with the Confederate Army gathering in Northern Virginia, and he wondered, well, how am I going to get some troops here? He suspended the writ of habeas corpus. They arrested a bunch of people, especially a man named John Merryman, who will take his case to the Supreme Court very quickly. Was Lincoln's action constitutional? No, said John Merryman, and no will say Chief Justice Taney and a majority of his courts. On the other side, Republicans supporting Lincoln would say, no, this was treason. These people were committing treason in preventing troops to defend the government. Taney's court sat down a ruling, an ex parte Merryman, that said Lincoln's actions were unconstitutional and he could not do it. Lincoln disobeyed the court. Said, to hell with you. I got a war to fight. 7 more times he will suspend habeas corpus. The problems got even worse, especially with conscription and the draft, which was very unpopular across many parts of the North. And then it got very difficult after the Emancipation Proclamation. We often teach about the Emancipation Proclamation as this moment, this great pivot in American history, which it is, and we celebrate it, day of Jubilee. There were millions of white Northerners who said, are you kidding me? I ain't fighting to free black people. I won't do it. There were draft resistors now. There were people in certain parts of the North that even started burning bridges. Even some recruiting agents were shot and killed. So there sits Lincoln. Well, now what am I going to do this time? Suspend a writ of habeas corpus on a nationwide scale. Nationwide, he used that word. Then he had the problem of a man named Clement Vallandigham. Vallandigham was a staunch Democrat in Ohio and anti-war and pro-slavery, and he began to make speeches all over Ohio. He was a former congressman. He began to make speeches all over Ohio. To make a long story short about Vallandigham, he gave a big speech in May of '63 to nearly 20,000 people. He spoke for 2 hours. It was like a festival of war resistance. The commander of the District of Ohio for the federal government was Ambrose Burnside, the general who had earlier failed miserably at the Battle of Fredericksburg, but Lincoln didn't fire him completely. He put him in charge of Ohio. Ohio never leaves this course. Burnside immediately put out an order without ever asking Lincoln to arrest Vallandigham. They invaded Vallandigham's house in the middle of the night, arrested him, put him in jail. He was given a very quick trial, convicted of sedition, and given a sentence for the duration of the war. When Lincoln and that protests began to happen all over the country, Vallandigham rally all over the country, free speech, people cared about this. Even some Republicans said, whoa, 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 Mr. Lincoln, you can't do this. You can't just lock people up for their opinions. Well, they were already doing that. Almost 300 northern newspapers were closed because of their opposition to the federal government and its war policy. By Lincoln's orders, newspaper editors, I forget dozens of them, I forget the number, arrested. We think we had it bad. Well, Lincoln finally began to realize, Vallandigham's winning this one right now, so he decided to commute the sentence to banishment rather than imprisonment. He banished him to the Confederacy. Vallandigham actually went into Canada. Turns out the Confederacy didn't want him. Hey, we don't need that guy. He's not much help to us right now. So Vallandigham was banished instead of left in prison. That didn't exactly solve it either. But Lincoln put out public statements trying to defend what he had done. And in one of those public statements, he famously said, "What am I supposed to do? If a young soldier, a boy soldier," he said, deserts, I'm supposed to shoot him. But a man can go out and resist the entire war effort and mobilize thousands to subvert our effort to save the Union, and I'm not supposed to do anything to him? He said, "I think I'd rather save the boy." It's very Lincoln-esque. It still didn't solve everything, to say the least. This problem was huge during the war. And in as early as 1866, in an ex parte Mulligan, the Supreme Court lost a lot of authority in the midst of the Civil War, not least of which was because of Dred Scott and other decisions. But it will rule that Lincoln's actions of suspension of the writ was unconstitutional. Free speech is as American as anything we have. That First Amendment is as American as anything we have. That map I just had up is, of course, we've shown more than one map in this course, I guess, but that one's embedded with the First Amendment over and over and over. But it's never easily defined or enforced, especially in crisis. All right, I want to end, though, with just two little points. The same Abraham Lincoln who's issuing these suspensions of the writ in 1863, which, by the way, the second one he did was on June 26, 63. Look at your chronologies of the Civil War. The invasion of the North by Lee's army and the Gettysburg campaign was in the middle. He's looking at an invading army into Pennsylvania. Oh dear. And of course, later that fall, he'll go out to Gettysburg and give a little speech. I'm not going to read the Gettysburg Address. You've all heard it, but go read it. And this time, look for the pronouns. Yes, there are key words. We love to talk about key words in that speech. The testing, the fact that he used the word equality, the central metaphor of birthright, rebirth. And then, of course, the whole theme of sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. And in the end, saving, if possible, the government of, by, and for the people. But look at the pronouns. Lincoln used the word we 9 times. There are 5 uses of our and us, and not once did he use the I pronoun. It was not about him. A president can make a speech that's not about him. Sorry. It was about us. It was about whether a republic can survive. It was about us as a democracy and its remaking. Lastly, and I'll stop here. You're almost up, Joanne. At the very time Lincoln was giving the Gettysburg Address, Frederick Douglass was writing his second greatest speech. It's called The Mission of the War. 4th of July speech, still probably number 1. But in Mission of the War, which Douglass crafted in November of 63, Lincoln gives the Gettysburg on November 19th, and Douglass takes that speech on the road 1 week after the Gettysburg Address, all across the North. He gave it dozens and dozens and dozens of times. It's called The Mission of the War. It's much longer than the Gettysburg Address, typical of Douglass. On the first page, he says, the most hopeful fact of the hour is that we are now in a salutary school, a school of affliction. If sharp and signal retribution, long protracted, wide, sweeping, and overwhelming, can teach a great nation respect for the long despised claims of justice, surely we shall be taught now and for all time. We're in a school of affliction. What are we going to learn? And then I just want to cite 2 other expressions, and it's a magnificent speech. Pull it up, easily accessed online, digest it, read it, alone, with no distraction. He names free speech very directly. And he does it in a long paragraph where his refrain is, we want a country. He does it about 16 times. We want a country that. We want a country that. It's so typical of Douglass. Genius at coming up with these refrains. And it's the kind of rhetoric where you just have to keep listening. What's the next example and the next example? We want a country and are fighting for a country through length and breadth of which the literature and learning of any section of it may float to its extremities unimpaired, and thus become the common property of all the people, a country in which no man shall be fined for reading a book or imprisoned for selling a book, a country where no man can be imprisoned or flogged or sold for learning to read or teaching a fellow mortal to read. And then he says the mission of the war, which he will repeat several times, is national regeneration. The whole idea is being remade in all this death that he's commemorating everywhere he goes, just as Lincoln had. at Gettysburg. And then the speech ends this way. This is Frederick Douglass's I Have a Dream speech. I end where I began, he says. No war but an abolition war. No peace but an abolition peace. Liberty for all, chains for none. The black man a soldier in war, a laborer in peace. A voter at the South as well as at the North. America, his permanent home. And all Americans, his countrymen. Such, fellow citizens, is my idea of the mission of this war. If accomplished, our glory as a nation will be complete. Our peace will flow like the river, and our foundations will be the everlasting rocks. Thank you.
Hello? Woo! Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Well, I have to say, it is such a pleasure to get to speak to you one last time. And in a sense, to take us full circle to where we began. Because, of course, we started this course by looking at the American Revolution and a few decades of its aftermath. And throughout those lectures, I discussed a few patterns that are worth pointing out now as we end this course. And I'm actually going to highlight 3 things that I think are worth noting at this point. So first, we saw how fundamentally, when considering things like American independence or the creation of a new national constitution, there were debates, real debates, as well as compromise. These weren't abstract documents. These weren't just ideas floating around. They were products of real discussions and real decisions by real people. So, for example, in the case of the Declaration of Independence, I talked about how discussion of that issue went on for quite some time, and I specifically talked about some Massachusetts towns where people were seriously debating the issue of independence. And I quoted one man from a town who observed, independence, quote, was the greatest and most important question that ever came before this town. I find that remarkably moving. It's why I repeated it a second time. Independence wasn't abstract. It wasn't just an event. It meant something, and that was a person living through that moment and what it meant. In the case of the Constitution, too, it was a product of intense debate and in more than one room full of people. The decision to have ratifying conventions throughout the states and to go to the press to argue the issues before the American people, that mattered. Having a new constitution required the people, in some sense, to buy into the new constitutional project at hand. Now, of course, in both cases, the Declaration and the Constitution, people largely were not wrestling with the meanings of how their statements did, or more broadly, did not apply to anyone aside from white men specifically, or even more broadly, white people. They created documents that were very much born of that moment, flawed as it was, but they unleashed ideas and principles that would come to fruition in the future, particularly for marginalized people of all kinds in ways that those founders and framers never imagined and probably would not much have liked. Along similar lines, second, we saw how processes of government mattered intensely. I talked at some point about James Madison documenting the process of creating the Constitution. He was documenting the process of creating processes, right? These are people who care about process, right? They care about the fact that you can put down on paper a process and that people will then abide by it. The Constitution is a fundamental agreement that Americans signed onto and still do, or should, a fundamental agreement about the government, what it is established on, its structure, its workings, and its founding basis, popular representation. During times of crisis, the assumption was that the Constitution would provide a way out. As Jefferson put it after the crisis-fueled presidential election of 1800, when asked, wow, what would have happened if there had been violence? What would have happened if the Federalists didn't allow a president to be elected? What would have happened if something had gone awry and the whole thing had blown up? And Jefferson basically said, the Constitution. The Constitution would have saved us. Yes, he acknowledged maybe it would need to be tweaked. Might not be perfect. It might be, as he put it, like a watch run down. So they would have to rewind it in a way, and then after that, the nation would move ahead, abiding by its fundamental pact, the Constitution. That was a given. Okay, so real debate, not abstractions, processes, and the Constitution as a process. Third, we've seen how posterity-minded people were in the revolutionary and founding era. They were creating an experiment in government, and they understood all too well that their decisions and actions would have a profound impact on Americans to come. They understood the historical significance of what they were doing. The history that they were making mattered. Now, I'm going to say at this point, we're going to have a brief commercial advertisement because I feel the need to say that if you want more of whatever it is I've been offering this semester, I actually have a podcast called History Matters that you can find on my YouTube channel. And now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Okay. So history mattered. Why did history matter to these early Americans? Not because it was full of glorious stories, but because it was complex, because it taught lessons. They didn't see the past as a gold haze of perfection, not even their own personal historical past. Remember, I quoted John Adams at the beginning of the semester, who in his old age, people kept coming up to him and saying, tell us about the founding. Tell us about signing the Declaration. And Adams said over and over and over again, it's nice that you revere your fathers, but we didn't know what we were doing. We made mistakes. We were improvising. And equally important, he said and believed that believing in a glorious American past did the United States a serious disservice. It suggested that the time for important political work was done. It also suggested in a way that American government and nationhood would be downhill from that glorious founding moment. And that's not what Adams or the generation in that period generally wanted. They looked to Americans to continue the experiment, to evaluate the government and the nation for themselves in their own time on an ongoing basis. They understood fundamentally that democratic republics don't go of themselves. They require human effort to survive and prosper, and nothing teaches that as well as the study of history. And it's important to note here, that way of thinking about history, again, wasn't grounded on a bunch of abstractions. That kind of informed knowledge of the past taught the founding generation about themselves and about their nation in a profoundly personal way. And I want to offer just one small example of the impact of that kind of realization, of the fact that our history matters profoundly and personally to all Americans. And it involves a museum, a visit by a Massachusetts congressman named Theodore Sedgwick in the early 1790s. So Sedgwick visited painter Charles Winslow Peale's museum, called the Philadelphia Museum. He opened that museum in the mid-1780s. Most museums at the time were sort of like private collections of curiosities in people's houses. Peale's museum would be different. It would be public. And according to his wishes, it would be telling the story of the newly established United States. Now, he was thinking about politics when he created his museum, not partisan politics, but rather he wanted to contribute to and bolster the nation's Republican core to give people a sense of America's history so far. Hadn't had a lot by that point, but still, there was some. And he wanted to show people what the United States was. And I picked this self-portrait of Peel on the left here, painted in 1822. He's holding back the curtain of his museum and in a way kind of revealing America's history, right? So he's kind of showing you exactly what he wanted to do. He accomplished his goals by doing two things in his museum. He had specimens, and you can kind of see some in the foreground there, of American nature, rocks and moss and animal skins and bones. Ultimately, he had some mammoth bones. He also had portraits of what he called distinguished Americans. And in the watercolor on the right, you can see along the top of the wall all of these portraits. They're sometimes people call them porthole portraits because they're all like faces surrounded by sort of a round golden circle. When Peel's gallery opened, it had about 30 portraits of American Revolutionary War heroes and Continental Army generals and presidents of Congress and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, and Peel assumed he'd keep adding to that collection. Well, I once found a letter from Theodore Sedgwick talking about visiting the museum, right? Because, of course, how can you do better than to find people living through the experience of what you're talking about? Sedgwick wrote lots of long, chatty letters to his wife. As a historian, I have learned over the years, there's nothing better than letters from people to wives. They say everything to their wives. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. So Sedgwick says, wow, I had this amazing experience. He has a little bit of a cultural tour. First, he goes to a library, a new lending library, which had almost no books because this is the beginning. And apparently the proprietor of the library says, we're going to get books soon, right? So, okay, they're getting there. And then he goes to this museum. And this is what he says to his wife, looking up at the portraits of distinguished Americans. Many of these men are now no more. The various affections with which my heart was expanded cannot be described. Till then, I never so well knew the value of portraits. Sedgwick was struck by the fact that the new nation actually had great national figures, distinguished Americans, enough to fill a wall. And the realization moved him. He hadn't thought of American history in quite that way before. It was personal. It had a deeper meaning. In a sense, by telling the story of the nation, the museum was telling the story of him. He experienced in that moment a fundamental fact about our history as a nation, indeed, about any nation's history. America's present was a product of its past, as would be its future. And we the people, all of us, are at the center of it, or should be. In all of the ways that I've emphasized today, the telling of our history matters, particularly in the present, given the high stakes and intense challenges of the moment at hand. As Theodore Sedgwick experienced, American history isn't an abstract tale. It's the making of us. It's the history of us, the story of us, all of us, the community of Americans. Not always a harmonious community, not always a particularly pleasant community, but still a community of nationhood. Now, I've said that magical word community. I have to say, as I'm nearing the end of what I want to say here, we formed a pretty amazing community in this room, and a lot of you have come up to me over the course of the semester and said that. We created a community of learning. I would say that we, at this point, are something of a we. And I think that matters. And that idea, the coming together as a we, is the essence of the American experiment. We, the people, the nation exists for us, all of us. That will be, should be, a big part of what we think about next year in 2026, when we consider America at 250. Never forget, America's semiquincentennial is about us, about we the people, in all of our diversity, in all of our complexity, in all of our disagreements as well as commonalities. To me, loving your country means loving it for all of those things, for its complexity, its diversity, its ideals, and its failures. Patriotism doesn't have to be shallow or glossy or performative. It should have meaning. It should be grounded on broadly shared ideas and ideals and a bracing recognition of who we really are as a people, for better and worse. And next year is going to be a prime opportunity to think about all of these things. Years like 2026 are moments of reckoning. Reckoning where we've been, where we are, where we can go, if we come together and work towards something better. Indeed, we must come together and work towards something better for the sake of all of us, for the sake of we, the people. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I have one last thing to say. I'm going to say I have one last thing to say, and then after that, we have some thank yous, and you cannot leave until we're done with the thank yous, because there'll be one last thing at the end. But I do want to offer one more person who wants to weigh in on the importance of understanding our history as a nation. Carl, take it away.
Look around, the revolution's happening in New York, New York. Hello, Joanne Freeman's class. If you're in this class, you're already winning. I hope you are enjoying one of our best professors. I hope you keep studying history because, as you know, it's never been more relevant and, you know, it has its eyes on you. Have a great class.
All right. He came through, right? He came through and he said when he sent that, maybe this will keep the rumors going. Okay, this class, man. Okay, so I want to thank him for doing that, but now the three of us have some other thank yous we'd like to give, and then there'll be one more thing we're going to do.
I'm not going to stand on Joanne's box, so I'll just do this. For those of you who do not know who that was Lin-Manuel Miranda. There were a few confused faces out there. But we wanted to, first of all, thank all of you, but especially to thank the really key people who made a class of this size and this complexity and this scale and scope possible. That starts with the Yale President's Office, with President Mari McGinnis, who, when we came to her with the idea for this course, she said, great, let's do it. Here are some resources, go for it. And she, of course, brought many people from her office to our aid here, especially Michael Hepp, who is somewhere in the room. Who did such wonderful work coordinating the course. He's in the back there. And working with community members. You have seen many people from the president's office in the back as you've been coming in, opening up, helping everyone figure out what's what. Beth LaPuma, among others, has been really wonderful. And of course, the staff of Battell Chapel, who have been here, opened their space to us, made this all possible, unlocked the doors, showed us where to go. We're grateful to all of them.
I don't need the box either, I think. Yeah, you know, at one point, one of you came up at that luncheon, I think it was over in the library, and said, has the university been censoring you at all? No. I want to especially thank our media team. Carl Peterson. These people all work in essentially invisibility over at the Yale studio and make all kinds of things happen here. This is my second time working with Carl, and I don't ever want to even do a course without you. I don't know, I'm going to have to bribe you, I guess. Guy Ortlieva, who's been on the camera every day here. Guy, there. In fact, guys, somebody came up before class and said, "I've been watching the videos." I thought, uh-oh. He said they were perfect. The sound was perfect, the visuals. So thanks for making us sound good and even look good. Craig Tomlin, also from the, I don't know, Craig's not here today, is he? I don't know. Craig Tomlin has also been a mainstay in the studio that's helped with all of this and the editing. And then Ryan McAvoy, which who have you not seen in here probably, but he does all of our podcasts, which is where we're going next. And we're very lucky to have such talent around this place to make this all happen. And these are all out there on the, whatever, I guess YouTube forever. That's scary.
No.
Anyway, thank you all so much. We do miss you.
I thought I'd be so subtle about that box, but no. Okay. A few more people to thank. I want to thank Marcy Kaufman from the History Department, who has been amazing in making this possible. I want to thank folks at the library. Those of you here from the community have not necessarily experienced what the students have, which is they've gotten the chance to see and get their hands on and study and write about things, documents from the time periods we've been talking about, which to me is one of the great joys of being at a place like Yale, is that those things are here, and if you're students, you can use them. So thanks to Barbara Rockenbach and Bill Landis, who was the amazing navigator. And I want to thank our amazing army of teaching fellows, which we needed an army because there's so many of you. And here they are: Atif Khan, Avery Johnson, Beck Borstein. Woo! We got particular yays. Yay! I know. Beck Borstein, Connor Hodges. Woo! Okay, everyone gets a who. Ella Starkman-Hines. Ella, there you go. Felix Santiago Martinez. Gabriel Mesa. I love the woos. I'm sorry, I love this. Jacqueline Davila. Yeah! You guys are the best. I know, it's the best. It is, like we're all getting our degrees. Camille Assan, Lauren Fraterman, Paul Seltzer, who sat behind me all semester, Precious Muhammad, woo, Victoria Sabarte, woo, and Wolf Schooler, who organized everything. Last but not least, I want to thank the community and the students who have made this what it was this semester. You have been amazing. This has been amazing. And I think we thank all of you. Okay. One more thing. Thank you. Thank you. I get me on my box?
Sure, we're on.
Where's the phone?
We want to take your picture.
Yeah. But I think we should go.
All right, we're going on the stairs. We're going to selfie with you.